The amusement park. I'm a photographer who specializes in abandoned places. Old hospitals, forgotten factories, crumbling motels. If it's left to rot, I'll find a way to capture its decay. So when I heard about an old theme park that was allegedly haunted, it was an easy choice for my next shoot, despite the 10-hour drive to Tennessee. I wasn't expecting much. Abandoned parks are usually just husks of what they once were. Rusted roller coasters, cracked pavement, peeling signage. But Mandy, my fiancée, thought it sounded like an adventure. She insisted on coming along, even though I warned her that it'd probably be just another empty location. She was in the mood for something spooky, and wanted to turn it into a trip to Nashville once we were done at the park. So we road tripped it, leaving in the morning and arriving at what was once known as Elysian Park late in the afternoon. Abandoned places will often still have a police presence or private security on site, so we parked on the street and snuck in through a hole in the side fence. At first it seemed like any other rundown site. The Ferris wheel loomed in the distance, its giant wheels slowly turning in the wind, creaking like it was still trying to carry the weight of 1,000 visitors. The bumper cars were scattered around a dusty arena, their faded paint and broken glass giving the whole place an eerie sense of abandonment. But there was something off about the park, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't just the silence, though the silence was heavy, like the place had been forgotten by time itself. It was the quiet, the kind of stillness that makes your skin crawl. No birds, no wind rustling through the trees, just the faint sound of distant creaking rides. Mandy was snapping her own photos with her phone of the old carousel, laughing at the rusted horses frozen in time, when I noticed the first odd thing: fresh tire tracks. I followed them with my eyes, and they led straight to the main entrance of the park, where the gates had clearly been broken open. They weren't old tracks either. Fresh, like someone had driven in recently. "Hey, look at this," I said, showing Mandy. She shrugged. Could it be from, city maintenance trucks or something? Or security, I said, although for some reason I didn't think either of those were right. Something about the trucks made me think they weren't from anything official. We kept walking. I was trying to ignore the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. I was looking for interesting shots, but the more we wandered, the more I noticed other strange things. Flickering lights on top of a small building near the carnival games. Graffiti on the walls that looked too fresh, too vibrant for a place that had been abandoned for years. I pointed it out to Mandy. "What, do you think we're the only ones that ever snuck in here?" she said. I shrugged. She was right, of course. Maybe it was nothing more than the remnants of teenagers sneaking in a few weeks back. But something just didn't add up. I decided we should head toward the back of the park. There was an old warehouse marked with a faded no entry sign that I'd been eyeing since we got there. We passed it quickly at first, but the curiosity started to gnaw at me. Something inside was calling out. Mandy was hesitant, but followed anyway. As we approached the building, the air grew colder. The door was slightly ajar. We crept inside. The smell hit us first, foul, like mildew and rot. But then I heard something else. A low murmur, voices speaking in hushed tones. I looked at Mandy and her eyes widened. Neither of us said a word, but we both knew something wasn't right. The voices led us deeper into the building. We rounded a corner, and there, sitting in the dim light, was a group of people. There were at least a half a dozen of them, sitting in a circle, their backs to the wall. They weren't facing us. They weren't even moving, just sitting still. Their clothes were worn and torn, dirty like they'd been living here for weeks, maybe months. But it wasn't their disheveled appearance that made my stomach drop. It was the silence. There was a stillness to them, a kind of heavy, oppressive quiet, like they didn't want to be disturbed, like they didn't even see us. Mandy's breath caught in her throat as she tried to whisper, "What are they doing here?" I shook my head, my heart hammering in my chest. Something wasn't right. None of them moved, not even when I shined the beam of my phone's flashlight over their faces. Finally, one of them shifted. A man in the center of the group. His face was pale, almost too pale, and his eyes were wide, as though he hadn't blinked in hours. His gaze didn't meet mine, though. It went straight past me, staring into the darkness behind us. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I didn't know why. Just something about his gaze made me feel like we should not be there. Before I could react, Mandy tugged at my arm, obviously feeling the same. We should go. She didn't have to tell me twice. We started backing away, our footsteps creaking louder than I thought they would, but as we neared the door, I heard it. A voice, soft and low, from behind. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. The voice didn't sound angry. It wasn't even threatening, but it felt like the air shifted when it was spoken, like something darker was suddenly hovering over us. We turned slowly, and the group was still sitting there, unmoving, except now they were all looking at us. My heart was in my throat. I grabbed Mandy's wrist. "Let's go. Now." We ran, the door slamming behind us with an unsettling echo. I didn't dare look back as we hurried out into the open air, back toward the main part of the park, toward the relative safety of the lights flickering overhead. We reached the Ferris wheel and stopped to catch our breath. Neither of us said anything for a moment. I think we were both too shaken to speak. Mandy broke the silence. Who were they? Why were they just sitting there? I shook my head. I didn't have an answer, but the longer I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. It didn't make sense. People didn't just live in an abandoned theme park, especially not in the kind of conditions they were in. They looked like they were waiting for something, or someone. "Let's just go," I said, trying to steady my voice. "This is all wrong." But as we started walking toward the exit, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. A few yards from the exit, I heard something. That same murmur again. Low voices, as if the people we'd seen were following us. I glanced behind but saw nothing. The park was empty, quiet but for that sound. It didn't stop. It got louder, closer. My pulse quickened. "Mandy, do you hear that?" She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. We picked up the pace, walking faster, but the sound grew louder still, like a chant muffled by distance. It wasn't just one or two voices, it was more, like they were gathering, growing in number. By the time we reached the broken fence, the sound was overwhelming. I didn't even think about it anymore. We didn't bother sneaking back out. We didn't care. We just ran, welcoming the idea of bumping into a cop. We didn't stop until we were back in the car, the engine roaring to life and the headlights cutting through the night. I looked over at Mandy. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. I had to admit, I felt the same way. We didn't speak for a while. We just drove. We were back on the highway before Mandy broke the silence. "What were they doing there?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't know. I'm not sure I want to." The drive was nerve-wracking. I half expected to see high beams pop up behind me with those guys chasing us, but nothing else happened. We made it to Nashville and checked into our hotel. That's where I am now. Mandy is taking a shower. I'm sitting here, looking at my camera, wondering whether I should look at the photos or just delete them all. I'm not sure how much I captured. I'm not sure I want to know. The Ghost Town Jacket. So this all started with a story. A local legend, really. There's a ghost town about 2 hours outside of the city, just off a deserted stretch of highway. We've heard about it for years. People would often talk about it and post about it on the forums. Supposedly, it was a small, charming little town as late as the 1960s. It fell off in the 70s, and by the late 1980s, the place had just died. People up and left overnight, leaving everything behind. Abandoned homes, empty storefronts, and a lingering mystery of why. There are dozens of different rumors about what happened, but nobody seems to know the truth. My girlfriend Ashley and I, along with our friends Mark and Danielle, thought it'd be a cool, creepy adventure to check it out. So we drove there on a weekend, just after sunset, looking for a thrill. And man, we got one. We didn't expect to find too much, just some old dusty buildings and a couple of creepy vibes. But Harrisville had something else in store for us. It was a ghost town, sure, but it didn't feel like one of those places you read about in the news. It didn't feel like it was abandoned because of some disaster or a tragic event. It felt like people had just walked away, mid-life. The whole town looked like it had been frozen in time, just left. The main street was lined with old shops, a deli, pharmacy, soda fountain and ice cream parlor, a woman's clothing store. Windows were broken or boarded up, but the interiors? They were almost perfect. The shelves in the pharmacy were still lined with dusty bottles. The deli's counter was covered in cobwebs, but it hadn't been trash or anything like that. It was like everyone just left their lives behind. Other than some litter left by previous explorers, there wasn't even much of a mess. We walked down the street, half expecting to hear footsteps or voices from behind, but nothing. Silence. The air felt heavy and thick, like the whole place was holding its breath. We made our way into the residential part of town. There were rows of quaint houses, small, cozy, but obviously weathered. Windows smashed in, doors boarded up. The whole place was creeping with decay, but it was eerie how peaceful it all seemed. As we reached the end of the block, one house stood out. It was a colonial, 2 stories with a wraparound porch, bigger than all the others, dark, brooding, like it had been watching the rest of the town slowly rot away. Of course, we went to check it out. Mark tried the front door. It creaked open like it was waiting for us. I hesitated, but curiosity got the best of me. We stepped inside, and it was like we had walked into someone's home right before they were about to sit down for dinner. The furniture was in place, dusty, sure, but there were no broken pieces, no sign of looting. No spray paint on the walls or empty beer cans on the floor. Family portraits lined the walls, a smiling couple with 3 little boys, their faces frozen in time. The whole place had an unsettling feeling of almost normal. I was just about to walk up the old wooden staircase when Ashley called me over. She was standing in the hall closet, holding a leather jacket. "Look at this," she said. "It's really nice. Try it on." At first I refused. I didn't want to mess with anything there, but Ashley insisted, and I'm pretty weak when it comes to her, so I threw the jacket on. "You look good," she said, giving me a grin. "You have to keep it. It's like a piece of history. It'll be such a great conversation starter." Mark and Danielle chimed in, pointing out that it made more sense for me to take it than to leave it sitting in that closet for the next 100 years. So I caved, leaving it on as we made our way back outside. We had gone about 20 yards when Ashley realized she left her phone inside. "I'll get it," I offered. "No big deal, right?" I went back into the house, using my phone's flashlight to guide me through the dust and shadows. I was retracing my steps when I saw it. Ashley's phone, sitting on the bottom step of the staircase. I bent down to grab it, and when I stood up, my flashlight passed over the staircase, illuminating a man standing at the top, staring down at me. I leapt back, nearly dropping both phones. His eyes burned with something dark, something angry. He stared at me without blinking. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. Finally, my feet started moving on their own. I stumbled over myself as I hurried to the door, running down the front steps, my heart racing, and told the others what I saw. They didn't believe me at first. Mark shook his head like he thought I was playing a prank. That was until Danielle screamed and pointed up at the house. The man, he was there, standing in the second-floor window, staring down at us. And then a woman appeared beside him, her face pale and vacant. "Let's get out of here," Danielle screamed, pulling at Ashley's arm. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I had to return the jacket. I couldn't take it. Taking something that had been abandoned was one thing, but taking something from someone's home, someone who apparently still lived there, was different. It was just wrong. Ashley was crying behind me as I walked back toward the house, raising my hands in surrender. I tried to show them that I meant no harm, and that I was apologizing for intruding in the first place. The man and the woman were still watching from the window, their expressions cold and unreadable. I walked inside, back to the closet, and hung the jacket up where we found it. As I did, I glanced up at the stairs. No one was there. "I'm sorry," I called out, my voice hoarse. I didn't know anyone was still here." There was no answer. I backed out of the house as quickly as I could. As soon as I set foot on the porch, I broke into a run. I didn't stop until I was back with the others. Ashley threw herself at me, still crying, but she was also yelling at me for being an idiot. Mark clapped me on the shoulder. "You got balls, man." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Then Danielle screamed again, and we all turned. The front door of the house was wide open, and there, standing in the doorway, was the man, wearing the jacket. His face was expressionless, but the coldness in his eyes sent a chill straight through my bones. He didn't look angry, just unwelcoming. It was clear to all of us that we shouldn't be there, that we should have never gone there to start with. As we backed away, he slipped back into the house, slamming the door shut behind him. We wasted no time getting out of there. We hurried back to Mark's car, breathless, hearts pounding. We were barely a mile down the road when Ashley gasped, "Oh my God." She handed me her phone. The last photo on her camera roll was a close-up of the man's face. His eyes were empty, dead. He sneered at the camera. Half his teeth were gone, his lips twisted into something barely human. That face, it will haunt me forever. The mall. Other than the guys I was with, I've never breathed a word of this story to anyone. Partly because I'm not sure anyone would believe me, but also because I was scared it could get back to some people I don't want to know I exist. Now that several years have passed and I've moved out of state, hopefully I'm not making a huge mistake sharing it here. It was the summer before my junior year of high school, and me and a few of my friends decided to sneak into the old mall that had been closed for years. I don't even know why we thought it was a good idea, but we had all heard that back in the 80s, the mall was the place to hang out. My parents always talked about it and even had their first date there, so we figured we'd check it out, see if anything cool was left behind. It wasn't exactly hard to get in. The place had been boarded up, but there were cracks and holes everywhere. We slipped through an opening, and immediately it felt like we were trespassing in some forgotten world. The place was dead silent, like it was waiting for something to happen. We walked through a department store into the main atrium, past the rusted gates of closed stores, abandoned kiosks, and an old fountain that once spewed water, but now just sat there empty, like a hollow monument to the past. There were old, dusty little ride machines in one corner, the kind you'd put a quarter in to make them move for little kids. They were frozen in time. Their bright colors faded to an unsettling gray. I was snapping a few photos with my phone, trying to get the best angles to show the creepiness of it all, when Jason and Harry had this brilliant idea to throw a table from the food court over the guardrail on the second floor. They wanted to see it explode when it hit the floor below. I thought it was a stupid idea, dangerous even, but I didn't try to stop them. That is, until the very last second. Not because I had some sudden moral objection, but because I thought I heard something. At first, the other guys thought I was just being paranoid. "You're hearing things, man," Jason said, brushing me off as I looked around. But then they heard it too. Voices. At first, they were faint, like people talking somewhere far off. But it was getting closer. "Someone's coming," I whispered. The guys immediately tensed up. We didn't know who it was, but we figured it was probably the cops. Had we been seen sneaking in? We took cover behind the counter of what had once been a frozen yogurt stand, trying to stay out of sight. But it wasn't the cops who came walking into view. It was a group of people, 5 or 6 of them. They were talking loudly, mostly laughing, but one of them sounded angry. Really angry. "Let's just go," I whispered, motioning to the others. But Jason had other plans. "Wait," he said. "Let's see what they're up to." For some reason, we all agreed. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the thrill of the unknown. Either way, we followed him. The men turned off the main area and down a hallway that led past the bathrooms, then into the back of the mall. This was the real creepy part, the kind of place that felt like it was never meant to be seen. The back entrances to stores were just empty doorways. No signs, no windows. At the very end of the hall, there was a door with a crack of light coming from under it. It was the security room, and the voices were coming from inside. I wanted to leave. I'd had enough, and I think Bill and Doug agreed. But Jason and Harry were set on finding out what was going on. We crept up, trying to listen through the door. I'll never forget what I heard. These guys weren't just hanging out. They were talking business, illegal business. Through the door, we heard muffled voices mention smuggling, money, and weapons. My blood ran cold. They were using the mall as some kind of headquarters. I motioned to the others, signaling that I was leaving. Quietly, I started backing away. Bill and Doug followed me without a word, but Jason and Harry hesitated before finally following. "Why'd you pussies leave?" Jason asked once we were back in the main corridor of the mall. "You guys are crazy," I muttered. "We're lucky they didn't notice us yet." Jason looked pissed. "They could be storing a lot of money here," he said. "And?" I said. Jason rolled his eyes like I was an idiot. "And we can wait for them to leave and check it out." "Are you nuts?" I asked. "You want to steal from these guys? You have a death wish or something?" Before Jason could answer, a gunshot rang out. We froze, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in Jason's eyes. The sound echoed off the walls, sharp and unmistakable. It came from the direction of the security room. No one said a word. Without thinking, we bolted, running as fast as we could. We'd come in through the department store at the far end of the mall, so we sprinted back that way, not stopping to look behind us until we had reached the store. The place was dark. We couldn't see anything back inside the main part of the mall, but after a moment, we heard footsteps, faint at first, but getting louder. They were heading in our direction. We ducked behind racks of clothes, trying to catch our breath, and that's when we saw the flashlight. One of the guys, maybe more than one, was walking down the aisle, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. They were looking for someone. Maybe for us. The beam of light flickered over us a couple times, but they didn't see us. After a few minutes, the light moved back down the atrium, and we didn't wait around. We got the hell out of there. By the time we made it out of the mall and across the street, we were all winded and freaked out. We didn't even stop until we were sitting in a McDonald's trying to process what had just happened. We talked about calling the cops, but Jason was worried we'd get in trouble for breaking in. Bill suggested we call anonymously, but Jason convinced us not to. "They'll trace the call back to us," he said. "We can't risk it." In the end, we went along with Jason as always, and kept quiet. But I never forgot it. I still wonder who those guys were, if they're still using the mall for their shady stuff, and whether anyone got hurt that night. I shuddered every time we drove past that old abandoned mall after that. It may have been dark and quiet on the outside, but I knew something sinister was going on inside. And you couldn't pay me to ever go back. If you enjoyed these allegedly true abandoned places horror stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time with more whispers from the pines.